Okay everyone, welcome to another Moe video guide. Today we're going to be doing it on Hearthstone. This is not my first Hearthstone video, but it is going to be my first deck guide for Hearthstone. So I already tried to record this video once and I had the mic off the entire time. So now we're just going to redo it and hope it's as good as it was the first time. So let's go in here to the collection real quick. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this video in two parts. First I'm going to go to the deck list here, as you can see. And I'm going to go through and just explain all these cards, why they're there, what they do, and certain replacements you can make for legendaries and like that. Just talk about the cards in the deck. And then the second half of the video is going to be me actually playing. I'm not sure if it's going to be one or more games with the deck. I guess it depends on if I win or lose, how long the game goes, etc. But there will be this deck in action in part 2. So if you're watching this video now, as soon as this video ends, feel free to look up and check out part 2, which is going to be, like I said, this deck in action. Alright, so let's start off. Basic introduction to Watcher Druid. It's a pretty basic deck. It's not very expensive to make. You see I have a few legendaries here, but I mean 3 legendaries in one deck is not what I would consider an expensive deck. That's just, oh sorry, 4 legendaries. I mean, it gets kind of expensive around 4 to 5 legendaries, but when it gets to the point of competitive play in Hearthstone, you really need to have legendaries. So I'm going to do this deck guide with the assumption that people watching this video have a basic understanding of Hearthstone. It's not going to be a beginner's guide. It's going to be kind of like an intermediate guide to this deck, or Hearthstone in general. Alright, so we'll start off with the first 2 cards here. We've got 2 golden innervates. Notice how I threw in the gold in there. These cards basically, they accelerate what you can play in the game. It's really good to have in your early hands. It's really good against rush decks. Basically what it does is it lets you play later game cards earlier in the game. And a lot of times what that can do is beat out a lot of other classes' early game weak cards. And that's kind of what you want to do to get board control. Is you want to get these get the rest of the creatures out onto the field as soon as possible. The good thing about this deck is we have the Ancient Watchers here, which is what the deck is named after, and that enables you to still get out something quickly, even if you don't get Innervate or something like that. But we'll talk about those in a minute. Wrath is the second card on the list. It's a very, very good Druid 2-drop. Deals 3 damage to a minion or 1 damage and draw a card. The reason this card is so good, and you'll see it in almost every Druid deck, is because it leaves you with so many options, and it's a card draw. Like I said, you can, if a minion comes out on the field that's a little too powerful for you to deal with and you don't have any other way to kill it, you can kill it really quickly with Wrath for 3 damage. Or, you know, like I said, you can finish off a minion with 1 health, and then you get a nice draw card, and you clear the board. So an all-around amazing card here with Wrath. Ancient Watcher here, like I said a moment ago, is a true 2-drop with 4 attack and 5 health, and it cannot attack. But basically what it does is it's your anti-aggro early game card, I want to say. It can really be beneficial at any point in the game, but basically what this card does is, since it can't attack, what you want to do is you want to modify it. What I mean by that is you want to put a Sun Fury Protector on it to give it taunt, or you want to put a Defender of Argus on it, which also gives it taunt and +1/+1. So it's basically just a meat shield, is how you can imagine it. But the great thing about Druid deck here is we have this Keeper of the Grove card, which is also a very popular, very strong Druid card, and it fits into almost every deck, is the Silence. It's very hard to fit silences in a lot of decks in Hearthstone, but Druid just has this nice built-in, really strong minion that also opens up options of dealing 2 damage that has a silence as well. And so this, while it may not be the best choice when you're playing this deck, can be used to silence the Ancient Watcher and make it just a 4/5 minion for 2 mana. So let's say, for example, you play Ancient Watcher on turn 2, or let's say you coin out Ancient Watcher on turn 1, and then the next turn you have an Innervate, and then you put out this guy, and then you have a 2/4 and a 4/5 on the field, both can attack. And that's pretty crazy. So like I said, normally it would take longer to play that set of cards, but because of the Innervate and because of the many options the Ancient Watcher puts on the field, you can get something out really strong really early. So before we go jumbling all through the cards and talk about synergies, let's go here. Blood Mage Thalanos does +1 spell damage and can draw a card. Basically, what you want to do with this card is it's a combo card that you want to use in the same turn. Because it dies quickly, obviously, because it's a 1/1, what you want to do is you want to save it till later in the game. So let's say I have Blood Mage Thalanos and Wrath later in the game. So what happens is, if I play these two on the same turn, I can do 4 damage or 2 damage to draw a card. So it just it opens up a lot more options, and worst comes to worst is you draw a card from it. So it's just a really good card to sneak in there. I don't think it's necessary, seeing as how this deck only has 2 spells, but this deck needs card draw, and that's where you get it from. And the spell damage is just kind of like a bonus thrown in there. It's not the reason the card's in there. Next up we have Sunfury Protector, another excellent 2-drop just because it has so much health. And it also gives minions taunt. Basically, this is put in the deck simply to synergize with Ancient Watcher to stop early rushes against Zoo, Warlock, things like that. Any rush deck, Aggro, Pally, Face Hunter, things like that. That's why you want to have Sun Fury, just to stop those kinds of things. Savage Roar here, you can see we only have 1 of them in the deck. It's a 3-drop that gives your characters +2 attacks this turn. This is basically part of your finishing move. The idea of this deck is to finish with Savage Roar and Force of Nature. Force of Nature, as you can see down here, this 6-drop, it summons 3 2/2 treants with charge that die at the end of the turn. Basically, if you have, on turn 9, if you have both of these cards, you have 14 damage in your hand, because each of these treants gets 4 damage, so we're looking at 12, and then it gives all characters, so that includes your personal Druid character, so that gives +2 as well, so that's 12 + 2 is 14. So, like I said, you whittle them down to 14, and then you can end the game turn 9. So this is the goal, is to end the game with these 2 cards right here. Next up we have Big Game Hunter, another excellent 3-drop, but again you can see I only have 1. It's really not necessary to run 2 Big Game Hunters, because basically this is an anti-Ragnaros card. As you can see here, Ragnaros is an 8/8, and this kills anything with an attack of 7 or more. Usually the way games go in the current meta is Ragnaros is a widely popular card, and that makes Big Game Hunter a widely popular card. So it's pretty much whoever can play their Ragnaros and not get hit by the other person's Big Game Hunters who has a better chance of winning the game. But that's why it's necessary to have in a deck, is because it's such an easy way to deal with high-level monsters for quick mana, and it still has 4 attack and can do something afterwards. So it's just an all-around really good card, but you don't need to. Next up we have Harvest Golem. I would describe Watcher Druid as kind of a mid-range deck, and Harvest Golem is a very stapled mid-range card. It basically just adds some beef to your deck. As you can see, this deck is a lot about mid-game beefy minions that can be modified with Argus and Sunfury Protector and things like that. It's just kind of like flood the board with nice, strong, balanced minions, and that's what Harvest Golem is. It just adds some beef in there. If you have 2 Harvest Golems on the field and you add a Defender of Argus, it's crazy because not only is that 2 3/4s, they also summon minions after they're killed, and so it's just a lot for someone to have to deal with, especially, like I said, rush decks. Swipe here is another staple Druid card that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. It does 4 damage to an enemy and 1 damage to all other enemies. This is a great combination with Blood Mage Thalanos because you can take out 2 health enemies with the splash damage of Swipe. So I guess earlier when I was talking about Thalanos, I didn't consider Swipe. But, so yeah, I guess there really would be no replacement for that for Thalanos, because Thalanos plus Swipe on anything after turn 6 is very, very strong, because it can deal 5 damage and 2 damage to all other enemies. So this card is just too good in almost any situation, so you definitely want to have 2 swipes. Next up we have Chillwind Yeti, which is probably one of the best 4-drops in the game as far as just like solid statistics. It's 4 attack, 5 health. And basically, like I said, it's there just to have some meat out on the field and modify it with your modifier cards. One of the best things you can do in this deck, turn 1, is you can coin plus Innervate and put out a Yeti turn 1. It's very hard for many decks to deal with, and it's just it's an all-around famous, really good first play for any Druid deck with Yeti and Innervate. Next up we have Defender of Argus. We've talked about this a lot. Basically it's a modifier card that just makes your other minions a little bit more powerful. Keeper of the Grove here again we've talked about. It can silence or deal 2 damage. It's very great for board clear of early pesky minions, or like I said, you can silence a taunt to get off your Savage Roar, Force of Nature combo, things like that. Azure Drake, you can see here that I only have 1 of those as well. one thing I said have said before about this deck is if there are any of these legendary cards you don't have, such as if you don't have Karen or you don't have Black Knight, putting in another Azure Drake would actually be a really good thing for this deck. Azure Drake is just an all-around really good 5-drop. It gives you spell damage, it lets you draw a card, and it's a beefy minion that can be modified by the several modifiers in this deck. So it's a very good card, but it's just there are certain things you need to fit in this deck, and I prefer all of the other cards that I have over an Azure Drake. Some people run only one Argus in this type of deck, but I feel like, especially with Watchers and just all these modifiable minions, there's more chances to modify than there are to do anything with another Azure Drake. So that's why I really like only having one Azure Drake. But like I said, adding another one would be good if you are missing any other cards in this deck. Next up, we have Druid of the Claw. Another staple Druid card, pretty standard in almost every Druid deck. It can be a charge minion, so you can help finish things off. You can quickly clear a minion, things like that, or you can add some beef to your board, give it taunt, 6 health. Very, very hard to clear, and it's just basically it saves you for at least another turn guaranteed. Force of Nature we've already talked about. It summons the 3 triggers with charge. Basically, the only time you want to use this, unless it's out of desperation to clear some kind of minion, is when you combine it with Savage Roar to end the game. That's the same reason you don't have 2 of these, is because these cards are meant to be used to end the game. So there's no point in having 2, because the game will be over by the time you would get to use the second ones. So there's no point in having 2 of these cards in the deck. That's why there's only 1 of each. Next up, we have Cairn. Cairn is basically 2 Yetis. That's the best way to think of Cairn. It's 2 Yetis for only 2 extra mana from a normal Yeti. So that's why it's such a good card. Is, like I said, the initial Cairn can be modified by all these modifier cards and become a beast. And then even if they kill it, it summons another Yeti. Or even if they kill it quickly and leave the Bane Bloodhoof up, then you can just modify that and it's still just as good as a Yeti, like I said. So just an all-around very high value card here. Black Knight, like I said, this deck relies on the finisher move, Force of Nature and Savage Roar, and that can't happen if there's taunts on the field, so Black Knight's just a good way to clear taunts. Ramp Druid is a very popular deck just because it's easy to play, so Black Knight is a very good counter against that. And it's just an all-around free board clear, and then, like I said again, it's just another Yeti. So it's basically a Yeti that clears a taunt monster, and that's just such high value for one card. Next we have Ancient of Lore, another staple Druid card you'll see in almost every Druid deck. Most of the cards that I say that about, you'll see have multiple uses in their text. As you can see, this one lets you draw 2 cards or restore 5 health. It lets you stay in the game. If you're low on health, boom, now you're not. If you're low on cards, boom, now you're not. And you have 2 options to do that while also putting a beefy monster out on the field that, again, can be modified. So you can kind of see the idea of this deck is just to, like I said, get out the beefy monsters and then modify them with the modifier cards and then just overflood the board to where you have too much for them to deal with. Last but not least is Ragnaros. This is just another option as a finisher for this deck. All decks need a finisher in order to essentially finish the game. So Ragnaros is just another way to do that. Let's say you had to use your Force of Nature to clear their Ragnaros because it was the only option you had. Well, you still have Ragnaros in your deck, hopefully, to be that additional finisher if Force of Nature and Savage Roar aren't cutting it. So it just, again, leaves another option to end the game up on the field, but chances are it'll get killed by Big Game Hunter or Hexed or something like that, which can't happen against Force of Nature. So those are your 2 finishers, but Force of Nature and Savage Roar is the better finisher just because it cannot be dealt with. So, like I said, we'll go through some replacement cards here for some legendaries. If you do not have Ragnaros and you're looking to replace it, you need some other type of legendary finisher. Ysera is not as good, but can work. Just any really strong late-game finishing legendary card is what you want to have in this deck. Black Knight, for these cards both right here, Cairn and Black Knight, they're both 6 drops and they're both 4/5. If you have another 6-drop legendary such as Sylvanas or something like that, that can be put in instead of either one of these cards if you only have one or the other. Argent Commanders, I'll show you these right here. This card right here is a very good replacement for 6-drops as well. And if you don't have these, then Boulderfist Ogre probably wouldn't be that bad either. Other than that, none of these other 6-drops are really necessary. You don't want the taunt because you have so many ways to give taunts to your other minions. You don't need more. So I would really go with the Argent Commanders, the Ogres, or the current deck list. All the other stuff is pretty irreplaceable. Most of the other cards aren't legendaries, like I said. Thalanos, I would probably put in another Azure Drake if you don't have Thalanos. That's your best bet, because it gives you both the things that Thalanos has just a little bit later in the game. Yeah, and then other than that, all these other cards are fairly necessary. You can't really replace any of the basic cards. Big Game Hunter can be put in or out of the meta. There's a lot of cards like that they're kind of in the meta and out of the meta, like Ooze, Big Game Hunter, things like that. So basically you have room for one flexible meta card here with Big Game Hunter, but I've never strayed away from Big Game Hunter, and I think that it's definitely the best one. So I would probably stick with that unless you know something that I don't. But yeah, so I think that about covers it as far as just the information about the cards in this deck. So we're going to go ahead and call this the end of the first part of this video. So like I said, if you would like to see this deck played in action, go ahead and click on part 2 of this video, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch part 1, and I'll see you in just a second over at part 2.